From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
The Democrats are getting killed.
The first 10 months of the second Trump administration have seen a tsunami of lawsuits challenging the president's policies, many of them filed at federal court here in Providence. That's no accident. Peter Nerona and his fellow Democratic attorneys general have said they're suing in the courthouses where they think they have the best chance of winning. But will the conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court rule the same way? This week on Newsmakers, a closer look at the pivotal role that New England's federal judges are playing in the legal battles of the Trump era. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This week, Reuters had an in-depth report on how federal courts in New England have played an outsized role in legal challenges to Trump administration policies. Some 72 lawsuits have been filed in those courts, many right here in Rhode Island. Our Ted Nisi interviewed the author of that story, Reuters reporter Nate Raymond.
Nate, thanks so much for joining me from up there in Boston to talk about your really fascinating article, I thought, on the role that the New England judges, federal judges, are playing in all this litigation and the turmoil around the Trump administration's policies. So many of them are being blocked here in New England, more maybe than people realize when you look around the country. First, can you walk us through what led you to decide to examine this topic specifically in more depth and kind of what you took away, what you learned from your own reporting?
Sure. I've been covering courts for a long time, and I actually moved to Massachusetts at the start of the first Trump administration. I had memories then of that we had a little bit of litigation here over Trump policies, but it didn't match anything like what has been happening this second term. And, there's been a lot of lawsuits that have suddenly been flooding the federal court in Rhode Island also, which was definitely not a thing the first go around. And I had a bit of a background in tracking during the Biden era of how a lot of lawsuits on the flip side had been shopped by conservative activists and Republican attorneys general to courts in Texas. And so I started looking at basically what was happening on the flip side during Trump's administration as Democratic state attorneys general and civil rights groups and immigration rights groups started looking for their own sort of advantage in court and what would be a favorable forum to sue in. And it turned out to be in my backyard.
So it's interesting, Nate, because for people who follow this to any degree, for years it was the Ninth Circuit, which is out on the West Coast. So I think most viewers will know, but just to remind them that the country's split into different circuit courts. The First Circuit covers the New England states. I think is Puerto Rico part of it too, the First Circuit? Yes. Okay. I remember there was not really a little different climate, but part of the First Circuit. And it was the Ninth Circuit for years that drove conservatives crazy because you had a more left-leaning bench and they would block everything and they'd put national injunctions in. And I don't think it had fully dawned on me that the composition of the Ninth has changed and the First Circuit here in New England is kind of the new Ninth. That's one of my takeaways from your story.
A little bit. During Trump's first administration, you're right, a flood of lawsuits came into San Francisco or Washington State or some even in Hawaii. And that's where a lot of the injunctions came in. They would block, the Muslim ban or various other policies that Trump was enacting at that time. He famously would rail against the Ninth Circuit as a disgrace. But at the same time, Trump was in the midst of a big project to transform the judiciary with sort of what became a near record number of judicial appointments, including to the Ninth Circuit, where he appointed 10 very conservative judges. And while conservatives don't have a majority on the Ninth Circuit, it was enough that it has shifted the math to the point where if you were really hoping to have an injunction sustained on appeal, there are not necessarily great guaranteed odds that you would have a panel of appellate judges who are appointed by Democratic presidents in this administration now. So on the flip side, here in New England, where we're in the First Circuit, this court is currently actually only has active judges who are appointed by Democrats. There are 5 of them. There's 1 vacancy, and Trump has nominated someone to that seat. But even if that person is confirmed, and he probably will be, even if he became a consistent vote for Trump's policies as they're being challenged, he would be always in the dissent, most likely. And so, meanwhile, at the trial court level, the judges are generally all Democratic appointees. There's one exception in Rhode Island, who was herself a Trump appointee, but she was actually originally nominated by Obama.
Mayor McElroy, who,
yes.
to our surprise down here in Rhode Island, when Trump nominated her in his first term, and to, frankly, the consternation of a lot of Republicans down here, who said, why did he give her this appointment?
Yeah, and she's been blocking a lot of things this go around. So, it's a very favorable venue, Rhode Island and Massachusetts. If you're a litigant looking to block one of Trump's policies, this is a favorable venue to find a potentially sympathetic judge and appeals court to help you do that.
And you had a statistic in your story, and this probably changes by the day based on how much litigation is going on, but you had 46 of 51 decided cases in our region went against Trump. The judges ruled against Trump. And so nearly all the time they are blocking they are going with the plaintiffs coming in to block what Trump wants to do. One thing I'm curious about is how often are they being upheld, though, when they get to an appeal? And I know it takes time, let alone if they get to the Supreme Court, which of course has a conservative majority.
Yeah, so to the extent the First Circuit has gotten to review any of these cases, and it's largely been on the sort of emergency, sort of more rapid process where the administration is just seeking to have an injunction put on hold instead of just entirely overturned. The First Circuit has largely upheld or left in place injunctions in almost all the cases. There are 3 where they have either set aside injunctions or overturned them. And in 2 of those cases, that was because of intervening Supreme Court decisions in part. And to the extent cases have gone up, meanwhile, from New England to the Supreme Court, in those cases, I counted 7 instances where the Supreme Court has consistently, in all 7 cases, or instances, set aside judges' decisions. And so the Supreme Court's been very consistent in ruling in Trump's favor.
You mentioned earlier you were covering this stuff at the beginning of the last Trump term and how clearly this has felt different to you. I mean, I can't imagine how you must have spreadsheets and a lot going on to try to keep tabs on all these different cases from where you sit. One of the things you mentioned in your piece, which I think will be interesting to our viewers, is how unusual it is to have a series of major national cases being filed here in federal court in Providence, not even in Boston. Talk a little about what you learned about that.
Sure. In the first administration, the Attorney General, Peter Marano, he would readily admit this, that the state was a bit of an afterthought for this sort of big multi-state litigation that state attorneys general pursue. He told me that the state was sometimes asked to join cases last minute, whereas this time around, the AG's office is very active and a part of these talks of how to bring lawsuits challenging Trump's policy and what those cases should be. Sometimes in court, Rhode Island AG's office has actually been taking the lead, which I think is a new role for them compared to, the first administration, certainly.
Another piece of all this we have to mention is, Rhode Island's Chief Judge John McConnell has been targeted by Trump allies like Elon Musk, and impeachment articles have been filed against him by a Republican in the U.S. House over some of his rulings. He says he's received death threats. He's not alone in saying that. How much has that issue of threatening rhetoric toward judges colored all of this over the course of the year, or to you as someone, is it sort of a separate though related issue to what's actually happening in the courtrooms?
No, I think, I've done separate reporting about the sort of what's become a rising concerns about threats to judges, including to Judge McConnell, as you mentioned, who I think he's said that he has received mysterious pizza deliveries. He's received threatening calls after he issued this ruling on the funding freeze. The court was inundated with threatening messages. And he's not alone. There have been numerous judges in other states, even weird pizzas that got delivered to Justice Barrett's family members, I believe, and even a bomb threat to one of her siblings. It's a rising concern, one that actually Judge McConnell has spoken out about publicly. The administration does not condone those threats. They will be quick to note that Trump himself has been subject of assassination attempts and condemns any political violence. But yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a sad state of affairs, frankly, of how we have evolved as a society that now,
the combustible
political violence can become such a
situation. Nate, last question for you before we wrap up here. There are dozens and dozens of cases moving through the courts related to Trump administration actions. Are there any top of mind for you that you're following most closely, or where you think the precedent's really interesting, or you're hearing a lot from your sources in the legal world?
Well, I mean, one of the biggest ones was just decided by the First Circuit. They again declared Trump's birthright citizenship order that would, deny birthright citizenship to individuals born in the U.S. whose parents aren't citizens. The First Circuit just declared that unconstitutional again. That's likely going up to the Supreme Court. There are cases I'm tracking over the future wind energy projects, that Trump has tried to halt. There's litigation over the future Planned Parenthood and whether it can get Medicaid funding. And there, like I say, there's a continuing volume of cases just over whether and how states can receive federal funding from the government and what strings are attached.
You are going to be busy, I think, for the foreseeable future. Nate Raymond, legal affairs correspondent for Reuters in Boston. Thank you so much for taking a few minutes to talk with us.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, Ted Nesi joins me in studio to talk about a busy week in news. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is 12 News Politics editor Ted Nesi. We're going to talk about some headlines from this week. A lot going on, Ted. But I want to actually start over the border in Massachusetts. You are a politics editor, of course. So Senator Ed Markey is facing a challenger, a Democratic primary challenger in 2026. Congressman Seth Moulton announced this week that he is going to run for U.S. Senate. Let's take a little bit of a listen to his launch video.
We're in a crisis, and with everything we learned last election, I just don't believe Senator Markey should be running for another 6-year term at 80 years old. Even more, I don't think someone who's been in Congress for half a century is the right person to meet this moment and win the future. Senator Markey's a good man, but it's time for a new generation of leadership, and that's why I'm running for U.S. Senate.
Well, Seth Moulton there, Ted, is just letting everybody know that Ed Markey's on the older side, and he's been in Congress for a long time, so he's really leaning into the age aspect here.
Yeah, and in a way, Joe Kennedy, 6 years ago, when he mounted a primary challenge against Ed Markey, that Joe Kennedy felt like he was dancing a little around this, didn't quite want to say Ed Markey's going to be too old, didn't quite want to say he's been in Congress too long, but was
probably mindful of voters that tend to skew older.
For sure, fresh ideas, new generation. I think you see here how much what happened with Joe Biden has totally changed the conversation among Democrats. Doesn't mean Moulton will definitely win, doesn't mean there won't be some backlash to just explicitly saying, look, 80 years old and 50 years of it in Congress is enough, and we need some new blood here. What I'm curious about is, Kennedy, in a way, we figured he's a Kennedy in Massachusetts. He had all these advantages. He did. He also had the disadvantage that it looked so presumptuous because it was like, oh, you're a Kennedy, give me that Senate seat back.
Right.
Moulton, at least, is just running as himself, doesn't have that baggage with it. So I'm so curious how this comes out. And it could be telling about where Democrats Democratic voters really are. But, a lot to play out from here.
Well, the Markey campaign responded to the announcement, so let's bring up a statement from their campaign. The campaign manager wrote, while Congressman Moulton is launching a political campaign during a government shutdown, Senator Markey is doing his job, voting against Trump's extremist agenda and working to stop the MAGA attacks on health care so that we can reopen the government. I think an early tell, master of the obvious, but something I'll be looking for are fundraising numbers for Moulton early on, and whether or not that's an indicator that he sort of has widespread support.
Yeah, and it's interesting. You see different things going on across New England. You have up in Maine, Janet Mills, the governor, just jumped in with much urging from Chuck Schumer against Susan Collins. She's in her 70s and will be in her 80s in her first
term. She has
term.
someone to her left running against her.
Exactly.
Yep.
And, there's certainly a lot of consternation over the age issue up there. In Rhode Island, Senator Reid is running again. He'll be 76, I believe, on Election Day. But very little talk about that. Might be partly because Reid is it's stronger politically in his base here. I think also there's a lot where I don't think it's the number necessarily with age, Tim. I think it's, do you seem vigorous or not? I think, someone in their late 60s.
Senator Markey sure seemed vigorous, and I can't believe it was 6 years ago in the studio, of course, our older one, where Kennedy and Markey squared off. And I remember you and I walked off the set and was just astounded by how Markey came out swinging.
Yeah, and Markey, there's not much sign to me that Markey's lost a lot of his energy. So that will be, you see other senior elected officials in Congress who are, struggling to walk. Frankly, we've seen this week. Mitch McConnell had that fall that was caught on camera. So it's just going to be interesting to see how the voters process this in the wake of Biden.
All right, let's do this. Senator Markey talked about the shutdown, so let's you and I do that. But I want to hear first from two of Rhode Island's, our two congressmen here, and also House Speaker Mike Johnson on the shutdown. Here you go.
Well, the first thing that has to happen is that the Republicans need to come back to Washington and do their job. We are 3 weeks into a government shutdown, and House Republicans have been on vacation for 26 days and counting. They have been on vacation while the government has shut down and while health insurance costs are about to explode for the American people because of this healthcare cost crisis that they have done nothing to try to solve.
If you're keeping count, 9 times the Senate Democrats have voted to keep the government closed. All the House Democrats except one voted September 19th to shut it down. So this is 10 total times now that Democrats in Congress have voted to close the government. And we know what that means for real people. We know what it means for our troops and our Border Patrol agents and TSA agents and air traffic controllers and everybody who relies upon services around the country. It's very real.
They need to be inspired by the stories of the people in their districts who are calling for help. This is not a red state or blue state thing, a Democrat or Republican thing. This is about cruelty or not. This is about health care or not. And that's how I think it will end, is that if Republicans come to the table and negotiate with Democrats.
All right, so Ted, a lot of finger pointing, as there always is in government shutdowns here. I was reading some national reporting that there are House Republicans who would be open to voting for to extend the Obamacare premium tax credits, which is what Democrats want. But it doesn't seem that President Trump is unhappy with the shutdown. He seems perfectly fine with it, which suggests the Republican-controlled Congress will probably be okay with it for now.
Well, it's interesting. There's just not much sign either side feels a lot of pressure. In the past, you've always seen about, I'd say by this point in the shutdown, one side or the other is starting to seem a little panicked about the public opinion going against them. But in this case, Republicans think they have the right side of the argument. They're like, you just shouldn't have government shutdowns. The Democrats are usually the ones saying that. They're the ones who keep voting against bills that would just reopen the government without doing anything else, just open it up. And the Democrats have seen polling that shows that they're doing okay in public opinion on this. They think this health care issue is something that reaches past their own base, but they're also showing their own base they're fighting. I mean, I do wonder, is it going to be, we're going to have to see more very tangible effects for average Americans to have more pressure on the politicians? I
have a thought, and I know we have to go to break, but just a quick thought. I do wonder if the president actually gave the Democrats a little bit of cover, and here's what I mean. He moved some money around in the Department of Defense so soldiers can continue to get paid. And I think that if military members weren't getting paid, there would be a lot more outrage, and there would be a lot of calls from, spouses of military members to Democratic members of Congress.
You could even argue calling it a government shutdown isn't really right, because no one's fighting the president moving money around. It's not even clear if he truly has that legal authority, but which Democrat's going to stand up and say, you can't pay those military members. They're okay with that getting covered. Social Security checks are going out.
Right.
People can still access Medicare benefits. I mean, so much of what the government does is continuing. So I think it's when we start to see, TSA agents who aren't getting paid maybe calling out sick,
right,
or, people in other parts of the bureaucracy that people care about, as you heard Speaker Johnson say there. But again, I've been surprised how little backlash there's been to the government being shut down from just the American public. So I'm curious to see when that changes.
We will see, because it looks like it's not ending anytime soon. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll talk about state budget. There's a surplus, but it's not all rosy. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. This is Ted Nesi. We're breaking down some of the headlines from this week. And one of the headlines you wrote was about the state posted a budget surplus. I think it was $20 million more than they expected initially.
I always call this the surplus, because it's
right.
They expected a surplus, but did they get even more in the final surplus, which is the real number you care about?
So, walk us through the surplus, I guess, and the long-term outlook for the state budget, which is great.
The good news is the state, as the lawmakers had planned, ran a $250 million surplus in the fiscal year that ended June 30th. Mm-hmm. But as always, when I do this story every September, October, I tell people don't pop the champagne, because that was 230 of the 250 million was already spoken for, because they used it to balance the current budget, the one we're in now. So you really only got about $20 million extra, which is really a rounding error in a $14 billion state budget. And the other reason we care about that, along with just keeping track of how the government is raising and spending taxpayer money, is the outlook. So, Governor, we're getting closer to budget season. January, the governor will have a State of the State and release his budget plan. At last estimate, he was facing a $300 million deficit, which is frankly not an abnormal number in recent years, post-COVID relief money. But, this is just another sign that there isn't some flood of cash from somewhere else that's going to paper over a lot of that. This is part of why the governor refused to sign the current budget, because he felt the spending was too high and was not sustainable.
Yeah, that's right. Now, you said, fiscal year ends at the end of June, and July 1st, the new fiscal year starts. October 1st, this report, it gets handed to lawmakers, which they need to look at. Yep. That's a little late, right?
It was supposed to be out September 1st. In fact, it was almost a month and a half late, which was the longest delay in releasing this budget surplus report since 2005. IT projects, not UHIP this time. The state is spending right now $91 million to upgrade all its back-end systems, accounting, HR, stuff like that. And according to the administration, they were just struggling to use the new systems to get everything trued up. They seem to be arguing that they think this was a one-time get used to the new system thing and it'll be smoother going forward. But House Speaker Joe Shekarchi has said, this isn't an isolated incident. They've been having bookkeeping issues, and he would really like to see that cleaned up heading into budget season.
All right, that's all the time we have. This week on Eli Sherman's Behind the Story, he's taking the temperature of East Bay businesses during the Washington Bridge crisis. East Bay RI reporter Ethan Hartley is his guest. You can see where to watch that, including on the free 12 Plus app. For Ted Nesi, I'm Tim White. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers.